Picture this: a bustling airport terminal, the promise of adventure crackling in the air, and a confident teenager ready to take flight. But in a single heartbeat, everything flips upside down. A dismissive glance from a flight attendant, a quiet but piercing remark that slices through the crowd, and the words, "No passenger ever wants to hear I'm sorry, but you need to step off the plane." It's the beginning of a drama soaked in injustice, privilege, and moral reckonings. Little does anyone know, especially those passing cruel judgment, that the girl's father is about to turn the tables in a way nobody could have predicted. Tiffany Wells was brimming with excitement that autumn afternoon, sporting headphones around her neck and a grin as bright as the future she imagined. At just 16, she was no stranger to airports or airplanes, having traveled with her parents since she was old enough to remember. But this trip from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport to New York's JFK felt different. It was the first time she'd fly alone, visiting her aunt in Brooklyn for a celebratory weekend. Tiffany had carefully packed her carry-on, a camera, a journal, and a few prized books. Her father, Richard Wells, was a successful entrepreneur with holdings in real estate technology and even a small production company. Tiffany adored him, but she insisted on making this trip by herself to prove her independence. Richard had respected her wishes, albeit with fatherly caution. He'd prepared every detail from priority boarding to seating in first class, but he also gave her a safety net. She was barely aware of a private plane parked on standby at an Atlanta hangar just in case anything went awry. Little did Tiffany realize that her father's quiet precaution would trigger a series of events that would not only change their lives, but also expose an ugly side of air travel and society at large. Even before she stepped onto the jetway, Tiffany felt a slight chill. The gate area was filled with all sorts of people: tired business travelers, excited families heading off on vacation, and a handful of older folks waiting patiently. But there were eyes on her that felt off. Not the usual glance one might exchange with a stranger, but something colder, more suspicious. She kept reminding herself she belonged here. She had her boarding pass, and her father had pulled strings to ensure she was comfortable. Still, the feeling only intensified when she approached the gate agent, an older woman wearing a forced smile. Her name tag read, Mrs. Polson. Mrs. Polson barely looked up to greet Tiffany, only muttering, "Boarding pass, please." Tiffany handed it over, and the woman scanned it with an unimpressed tilt of her head. "First class. Is that correct?" the agent asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, that's right," Tiffany replied with polite confidence. Mrs. Polson paused, then printed out a baggage tag for Tiffany's carry-on. "All right then, you'll board with Group 1. Tiffany tried to brush off the woman's odd tone, focusing on the excitement of her journey. But a tiny knot had begun to form in her stomach, hinting that not all was going to go smoothly. Tiffany found her seat in the first-class cabin, a window seat in the second row. She set her backpack in the overhead bin, slipped her headphones over her ears, and glanced around. Fellow passengers in first class mostly ignored her, each absorbed in the business of settling in. A man in a pinstripe suit shot her a double take, but Tiffany simply looked away, pulling out her phone to text her father that she was safely seated. Moments later, a flight attendant named Veronica breezed down the aisle with a practiced smile. "Can I offer you a beverage, miss?" she asked. "Just some water, please," Tiffany answered politely, removing her headphones. Veronica nodded, but hesitated. Her gaze flicked up and down Tiffany's slender frame and the color of her skin, an assessment that was neither subtle nor friendly. Something about Veronica's posture suggested she found Tiffany's presence questionable, as if searching for a reason to confirm her suspicion that Tiffany didn't belong. Tiffany tried to maintain her composure, reminding herself she'd done nothing wrong. But deep down, a flicker of unease flared. She'd been warned about these moments. Her parents had always told her to carry herself with dignity, no matter the situation. She took a breath, resolved to stay calm, and took the water Veronica handed her, trying not to let anxiety take root. As the cabin began to fill, Tiffany observed a subtle exchange between Veronica and another flight attendant, Logan. They glanced in Tiffany's direction, whispering in hushed tones. She caught Logan's quick shrug, a sign he didn't see anything particularly unusual. Veronica, however, pursed her lips in disagreement. When everyone was settled, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a slight delay due to weather conditions. Tiffany leaned back in her seat, trying to calm her nerves. She opened a novel one she'd been wanting to read for weeks, but found it impossible to concentrate. Every so often, Veronica walked past, giving Tiffany the kind of sidelong look that says, "I'm watching you." Finally, Tiffany decided to break the ice. "Excuse me," she said softly, as Veronica passed. "Will we still be on time to land in New York?" Veronica forced a thin smile. "We should be, weather permitting." Then she added, "I just want to confirm something. Your seat number is correct, right? You do have a first-class ticket." Tiffany froze, unsure of how to respond to the blatant insinuation. "Yes," she answered, swallowing hard. "My father booked it." "Interesting," Veronica murmured, and walked away, leaving Tiffany feeling both indignant and powerless. Time inched forward, and the tension was palpable. The seatbelt sign was still illuminated due to the delay, and passengers began shifting restlessly. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman wearing a pearl necklace tilted her head as she watched Veronica speak to someone who appeared to be a supervisory flight attendant. Tiffany strained to catch snippets of the conversation, words like uncertain verification and questionable passenger. Suddenly, Veronica and the supervisor made their way directly to Tiffany's seat. The supervisor, a stern-faced man with a crisp uniform, cleared his throat. "Miss, can I see your boarding pass again?" he asked in a low but firm tone. Tiffany fumbled to retrieve the slip of paper. She handed it over and he scanned it meticulously. "She's supposed to be here, Logan," the other flight attendant interjected, seeming a bit uncomfortable. Veronica glanced at him, then at Tiffany. "We just need to be absolutely sure, Logan, protocol," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Tiffany tried to steady her breathing as she watched the supervisor check an iPad for seat assignments. She half expected him to apologize and walk away. But when he looked up, his expression was devoid of remorse. "Miss Wells, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to deplane. We need to clarify a few matters before takeoff." A collective hush fell over the first-class cabin as passengers turned their heads to watch the unfolding spectacle. Tiffany's heart slammed against her ribcage. She attempted to maintain her composure, remembering her parents' teachings about grace under pressure. "Is there a specific reason?" she asked as calmly as she could, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "It's an airline policy matter," the supervisor said vaguely. "We just need you to disembark, and once everything checks out, we'll consider reboarding." Tiffany looked around, searching for a friendly face, someone who might interject on her behalf. But the business travelers returned to their laptops, avoiding eye contact. The woman with the pearls pursed her lips and looked away. No one seemed interested in stepping up for a lone teenager facing potential discrimination. Gathering her courage, Tiffany rose from her seat. She reached for her backpack, her mind scrambling. Should she call her father now? The plane wasn't even in the air yet, but her entire trip had derailed into an embarrassing confrontation. As she stepped into the aisle, Logan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering, "I'm sorry." It was the only kindness she'd encountered on this flight. Holding back tears, Tiffany made her way down the aisle. Every step felt heavier than the last, and she could feel stares drilling into her back. She was about to exit the plane, singled out and shamed. Her mind buzzed with questions. What had she done to cause this? Was her ticket flagged? Had something gone wrong with her father's payment? Or was there something else at play, something uglier and more insidious? Once, on the jet bridge, the supervisor led Tiffany to a corner away from other passengers who were stepping onto the plane. Her eyes flicked to see Veronica standing a short distance away, arms folded, looking vaguely triumphant. "Miss Wells," the supervisor began, "the airline has concerns regarding the authenticity of your first-class ticket. We're going to verify it. If it checks out, we'll place you on the next available flight, or this one, if there's still time." Tiffany felt her cheeks burn. "But it's legitimate. I have the confirmation and the receipt. My father booked it. This is humiliating." The supervisor shrugged, appearing unsympathetic. "We just follow protocol here. Please wait while we sort this out." Off to the side, Veronica made a dismissive gesture, as if Tiffany's presence was something to be tidied up and disposed of. Tiffany took a shaky breath and reached for her phone. Her father answered on the second ring, his deep, reassuring voice immediately sensing her distress. "Tiff, what's wrong?" he asked, skipping the usual pleasantries. She tried to keep her voice even, but emotions seeped through. "Dad, they made me get off the plane. They're saying they need to verify my ticket." There was a beat of silence. Tiffany could practically feel her father's indignation through the phone. "Stay calm," he said. "I'll handle this." "Where are you right now?" "In the jet bridge with the supervisor," she whispered, glancing around. "They're treating me like I've committed a crime." Richard inhaled sharply. "Put me on speaker and hand the phone to the supervisor." Tiffany complied, stepping closer to the supervisor. "My father wants to speak with you," she said, offering her phone. The supervisor's eyes flickered, apprehensive about speaking directly to an upset parent. But after a moment's hesitation, he took the phone. "Sir, your daughter's ticket," he began, only to be cut off by a forceful voice from the other end of the line that Tiffany was both relieved and slightly unnerved to hear. Richard's voice came through, loud and clear, bristling with authority. "My daughter has a fully paid legitimate ticket in first class. If there's any doubt, I can forward immediate proof of purchase. What is your reason for pulling her off the plane?" The supervisor attempted an even tone. "Sir, we have the right to verify any suspicious or potentially fraudulent ticket. We're simply following airline protocol." Tiffany could hear her father's measured fury. "Suspicious, because a black teenager is sitting in first class. That's what this looks like. I'll be sending you the confirmation in the next 5 minutes. If I don't hear that Tiffany has been reseated on that plane, we'll have a serious problem." Before the supervisor could respond, Richard continued. "Also, please be advised that I have a private aircraft on standby at a nearby hangar. Do you understand what that implies?" The supervisor's expression hardened, but a trace of uncertainty flickered across his face. "Sir, we are not discriminating against your daughter. We only discovered an inconsistency in our system." Richard's laugh was cold. "Check your system then. But rest assured, if Tiffany is not treated with the respect she deserves, you won't just be hearing from me. You'll be hearing from my legal team, from the press, and from social media. Give the phone back to my daughter." Tiffany's heart pounded as she took the phone back. "Dad, I'm sending the proof. Give the supervisor your email address so they can watch their inbox. I'll keep you on the line." I want to see how they handle this." Tiffany relayed the instructions to the supervisor, who reluctantly provided his official airline email. Moments later, a ping on the supervisor's phone signaled the arrival of Richard's message. The man opened the email and scanned it, his face darkening with an emotion Tiffany couldn't read, embarrassment perhaps, or annoyance. "All right," he said finally, clearing his throat. "It appears everything is in order. We appreciate your cooperation, Miss Wells. We'll do our best to expedite reboarding." Tiffany breathed a sigh of relief, but the ordeal was far from over. The supervisor stepped away to speak into his radio, presumably to inform the flight crew that Tiffany would be returning. However, minutes passed with no further instructions. Tiffany felt her frustration boiling over. The plane was supposed to depart soon. Why was she still standing here? She clutched her phone, listening to her father's steady breathing on the other end. She sensed that if another minute dragged by without action, Richard would escalate the matter. Unbeknownst to Tiffany, he was already formulating a more dramatic plan. After an agonizing wait, Veronica emerged from the aircraft, her expression stony. "I'm sorry, Miss Wells," she said, arms folded, "but the flight is now fully boarded and closed. We won't be able to accommodate you on this flight." Tiffany felt her mouth go dry. "But you said I was told I could reboard once this was settled?" Veronica shrugged her eyes, betraying a hint of vindictive satisfaction. "The gate is closed. We can't hold up an entire flight. You'll be rebooked on a later one. That's the best we can do." Tiffany felt the sting of tears threatening to well up. She had done nothing wrong. Yet here she was, cast aside. "Dad, did you hear that?" she whispered into the phone, her voice trembling. Richard's voice crackled back. "I heard. That's absolutely unacceptable. I'm on my way to the airport." Veronica glanced at Tiffany's phone, overhearing. Her demeanor shifted slightly, perhaps a sliver of worry that her actions would have consequences. Still, she maintained her posture. "You can wait in the lounge until we find you a seat on the next available flight." Tiffany wanted to scream at the unfairness. Her father had sent proof of her legitimate ticket. She was singled out, humiliated, and then dismissed as if it was standard procedure. The ache in her chest felt like betrayal. Still holding her father on the line, Tiffany walked slowly back into the terminal. The plane's door sealed behind her, and she watched through the window as ground crew began final checks. In the distance, the engines whirred ominously, a reminder that the flight she was supposed to be on was leaving without her. Richard's voice came through resolutely. "Tiffany, find a place to sit and wait for me. I'll be there soon." "What are you planning to do, Dad?" she asked, wiping a tear from her cheek. He paused before answering. "Do you remember how I told you we always prepare for the worst-case scenario when we travel? This is exactly why I keep the jet on standby. You deserve better treatment than this, but I'm also not letting this slide. I'm furious, Tiff." She could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. Richard Wells was not a man to be trifled with, and she knew that once he set his mind on righting a wrong, nothing could hold him back. She just never imagined that righteous fury would lead to the events that would soon engulf the entire airport in chaos. Meanwhile, in the airport's back offices, word of the incident began filtering up the chain of command. A mid-level manager named Pam caught wind of a potential discrimination complaint. She alerted her boss, who alerted the head of customer relations, who in turn made a quick call to the pilot of Flight 287. Rumors swirled that a wealthy businessman was about to raise a storm over how his daughter had been treated. On the aircraft, some of the first-class passengers noticed the tension among the crew. They whispered among themselves, trying to piece together the puzzle. The pilot's voice came on the intercom, announcing a minor delay in takeoff due to unexpected operational issues. Veronica fumed silently, her triumphant mood somewhat dampened by the sudden attention. She tried to maintain her composure, but cracks were showing. Logan, on the other hand, wore a troubled expression, his conscience gnawing at him for not standing up more forcefully for Tiffany. Far from the plane's cabin, Richard Wells sped toward the airport in a black SUV, his driver weaving through Atlanta traffic. The images of his daughter's humiliation burned in his mind. He clutched his phone, firing off messages to his legal team, his PR agent, and his private pilot. If the airline thought rebooking Tiffany on a later flight was the end of the story, they were sorely mistaken. When Richard Wells stormed through the terminal doors, heads turned. He was a tall, imposing figure in a sharp suit, eyes blazing with protective fury. Tiffany spotted him and ran into his arms. For a moment, the busy world of the airport receded, and all she could feel was the comforting presence of her father. "It's okay, honey," he murmured, smoothing her hair. "I'm here now." He pulled back, scanning her face. "Are you all right?" Tiffany nodded, though tears threatened to resurface. "I'm more angry than scared." Richard's lips tightened. "Good. Anger is fuel. Now, let's see what can be done." He turned to a woman wearing an airline uniform who hovered near them, presumably a customer service representative. "My name is Richard Wells. I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge here regarding the blatant discrimination my daughter faced." The woman looked apprehensive, glancing at Tiffany and then back to Richard. I'll need to call my manager," she stammered. "You do that," Richard said coldly, "and tell them this is no minor complaint." Tiffany clung to her father's side, her heart still fluttering from the aftermath of the confrontation. She had no idea just how far her father was willing to go, but she was about to find out. Within minutes, a short, bespectacled man named Don came rushing into the waiting area where Richard and Tiffany stood. "Mr. Wells," he asked, trying to sound authoritative, but betraying a note of panic in his voice. "That's me," Richard responded curtly. Don extended his hand. "I'm the regional manager for customer relations. I understand there's been a misunderstanding regarding your daughter's ticket." Richard didn't shake his hand. Misunderstanding implies it was mutual confusion. This was discrimination, plain and simple. Don blinked clearly, unprepared for the blunt accusation. "Please, let's step into the lounge and discuss this calmly," he suggested, casting a nervous glance around at the onlookers who were beginning to gather. In the lounge, the three sat at a small table. Don tried to placate them with refreshments, which Richard waved away. Tiffany, feeling the weight of her father's fury, stayed silent. She had expected him to be angry, but not this unrelenting. Don cleared his throat. "Our records show Miss Wells did indeed have a valid first-class ticket. We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. We'd be happy to rebook her immediately on our next flight to JFK. We will also offer an upgrade for any future travel." Richard leaned forward. "An upgrade to first class from first class? That's hardly a concession. My daughter was thrown off a plane, publicly humiliated. How does that get resolved by a mere rebooking, and now she'll lose hours, if not an entire day, of her trip?" Don's smile faltered. "We understand your frustration." "It wasn't our intention," Richard shot back. "Intentions don't matter when the effect is blatant racism." Don pulled out his phone and began tapping furiously. "Sir, let me see if I can get you on a flight that's leaving in an hour." Richard sat back, his gaze never leaving Don's face. "I'm not sure you understand the magnitude of this situation. I'm filing a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation. and I'm publicizing every detail of what happened. Don swallowed color draining from his cheeks. That's certainly your right, Mr. Wells, but please consider that we value your business, value my business, Richard repeated with a hollow laugh. I doubt it, because if you truly valued our patronage, you wouldn't have singled out my daughter based on her appearance. Let me remind you that I have a private jet. I'm here giving you my business by choice because you're a major carrier. But that choice can change. Across the lounge, a few passengers pretended not to listen, though their ears were clearly perked. Tiffany noticed some whispering phones, angled discreetly, possibly recording. She realized how quickly rumors could spread, especially in an airport. Don looked at his tablet again. We can have your daughter on that flight, Mr. Wells. In the meantime, would you be open to discussing compensation? We really want to make this right. Richard's expression hardened. We're far past discussing small compensations. Without waiting for Don's response, Richard called someone on his phone, stepping to a more private corner of the lounge. Tiffany watched, curious. She saw the tension in her father's posture lessen briefly as he spoke in hushed tones, presumably to the pilot of his private jet. When he returned to the table, there was a gleam in his eye that Tiffany recognized the look of a man about to make a bold move. All right, Richard told Don, crossing his arms. My pilot is prepping for departure. We'll leave from the private terminal in about half an hour. Now here's what's going to happen. You will personally escort us to the gate where Flight 287 is waiting, and you will apologize on behalf of the airline to my daughter in front of your staff and the passengers you humiliated her in front of. If you fail to do that, I'll make sure this story hits every major news outlet by tomorrow morning. I have the contacts, trust me. Don's eyes widened. Flight 287 is due to depart in minutes. They've already sealed the doors. Richard raised an eyebrow. Then open them, or hold the flight on the runway. I don't care. My daughter is owed an apology, and she'll get it before I leave for the private terminal. Tiffany was stunned. She had never seen her father wield his power so directly. She admired him for it, though she also felt a pang of guilt. Would the other passengers be inconvenienced? But then again, they had all silently watched her humiliation. Perhaps it was time the airline felt a little discomfort of its own. Don made frantic calls to the operations center and the gate crew. Meanwhile, Richard led Tiffany out of the lounge and toward the gate for Flight 287. The corridor was nearly empty now, with only a few stragglers and staff. Outside the window, Tiffany saw the airplane on the tarmac engines running. A minute later, a crackling announcement blared over the PA system. Attention passengers of Flight 287. We have a brief operational delay. Please remain seated and wait for further updates. Veronica appeared in the corridor, looking flustered. She caught sight of Tiffany and Richard and froze. Richard's eyes narrowed as he approached her. Veronica, is it? You singled out my daughter. Veronica's face flushed. Sir, it was just... There was confusion. Richard took a step closer, not menacingly, but with unmistakable intent. Confusion about a legitimate ticket that was verified. Because you assumed a young black girl couldn't possibly belong in first class? Veronica faltered her voice, barely a whisper. I didn't. Don't lie now, Richard said, cutting her off. It's time to make things right in front of everyone. Tiffany watched as Veronica's bravado crumbled under the intensity of her father's stare, but an unexpected sense of vindication fluttered in Tiffany's chest. For once, consequences would be faced head-on. On the aircraft, passengers were whispering among themselves, restless and curious. They could sense something unusual was happening. Some had glimpsed Tiffany being escorted off earlier, and now they saw a small group of airline staff gathering near the door. Logan, the flight attendant, who had shown Tiffany a hint of kindness, stood by uncertainly, arms folded across his chest. Don arrived out of breath and motioned for the crew to open the aircraft door. Airport protocol typically forbade reopening a sealed door, but in this extraordinary situation, exceptions were being made or forced. The door hissed open, revealing a short boarding ramp. Passengers craned their necks to see Richard and Tiffany appear at the threshold. "This is highly irregular," Don muttered nervously to Richard. Richard didn't respond. Instead, he looked to Tiffany and then nodded, urging her forward. Tiffany swallowed her pride and stepped onto the plane. The hush inside was almost eerie. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, the same first-class passengers who had silently watched her earlier ejection, now seeing her return with an entourage. Veronica and the supervisor stood near the front galley, their expressions a cocktail of embarrassment and defiance. Richard motioned Don forward. "Do it," he said, his voice dangerously calm. Don took a shaky breath and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Don began, voice wavering slightly on behalf of the airline, "we sincerely apologize to Miss Tiffany Wells for the inconvenience and distress caused by our oversight." Don cast a meaningful glance at Veronica, silently urging her to speak. The flight attendant's face was ashen. She stepped forward, eyes darting around the cabin, perhaps hoping someone would leap to her defense. None did. Even Logan avoided her gaze. Veronica faced Tiffany, her posture stiff. "Miss Wells, I'm sorry for any misunderstanding regarding your seat assignment. It was never my intention to—" Her voice cracked slightly, the apology sounding rehearsed or forced. Tiffany studied her face. She sensed the apology was more about appeasing her father's wrath than acknowledging any real remorse. Nonetheless, Tiffany nodded. "I appreciate the apology." The tension in the air felt thick enough to slice. Passengers who'd witnessed the earlier drama looked on with a mixture of confusion, guilt, or relief that they themselves weren't in the hot seat. Richard cleared his throat. "I expect the airline will be following up with a written statement. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have another flight to catch, one that won't result in my daughter being thrown off." And with that, the entire saga seemed to draw to a close, at least on the surface. But there was a final twist in store. Because as Tiffany and Richard left the aircraft, a ground crew member raced up breathless to deliver some startling news that would upend everything once more. "Mr. Wells," the ground crew member panted, trying to catch his breath. "Your private aircraft, it's blocking the runway." Richard's expression turned to confusion. "What do you mean blocking the runway?" The crew member stammered. "Your jet is on the taxiway, refusing to move. They claim they need immediate clearance to take off, but there's some hold-up with scheduling. They've halted operations. Planes inbound are stacking up. Flights can't depart. It's chaos." Tiffany's eyes widened. She knew her father was upset, but had he instructed his pilot to do something so drastic? Richard shot her a quick glance, then turned to the crew member. "I'll handle this," he said coolly, reaching for his phone. As he placed the call to his pilot, Tiffany heard the indignation in his voice. "What's going on out there? I told you to prep for departure, not blockade the airport." The pilot's response was too muffled for Tiffany to discern, but she could sense the tension. People in suits and uniforms were scrambling around them, radios crackling. A swirl of confusion engulfed the terminal, and Don reappeared looking frantic. "Mr. Wells, we can't have your aircraft obstructing the runway. We'll face significant FAA violations." Richard ended the call, pinching the bridge of his nose. "This was not my intention. Let's get this sorted out quickly." Within minutes, An emergency operational meeting was convened in a small conference room with Richard, Tiffany, Don, and airport operations staff crammed inside. A large screen displayed the airport's runway traffic. Sure enough, the private jet labeled NY-112 sat idly on the taxiway like an unmoving chess piece, messing up the entire board. Commercial flights could neither arrive nor depart without intricate rerouting. "We can't just have a private jet commandeer a commercial runway," and operations manager barked. Richard slammed his palm on the table. "No one is commandeering anything. My pilot says he requested immediate clearance after repeated delays, and he was told to wait indefinitely. So now he's refusing to budge until granted a takeoff window." Don interjected, mopping sweat from his brow. "Let's remain calm. This is a serious logistical problem. We have thousands of passengers that will be affected if we don't resolve this." Tiffany felt the weight of the situation. She wanted justice for what she had gone through, but shutting down an entire airport, that was more chaos than she ever anticipated. Richard locked eyes with the operations manager. "Look, I'll get my pilot to move, but I want assurance that my daughter will receive a thorough public statement from the airline acknowledging their wrongdoing, plus any other measures to ensure this never happens again." The operations manager folded his arms. "That's a matter for the airline. My priority is clearing that runway." Don jumped in, looking cornered. "We'll do it. We'll make a public statement. Just get your jet off that runway, Mr. Wells." Richard stepped into the hallway to call his pilot again, determined to end the standoff. Tiffany followed, anxious. "Dad, this is insane," she whispered, glancing around at the frantic airport staff. Richard exhaled heavily. "I know. I never intended for it to escalate to this. My pilot is headstrong." Once they told him to wait for no good reason, he decided to fight fire with fire. "So what now?" Tiffany asked. "We're going to release the runway on the condition the airline publicly admits fault and sets forth a plan to address incidents like yours in the future. I'm not letting them get off lightly." Tiffany nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude, but also concern. She never wanted to cause such widespread disruption, but she also felt a thirst for real justice. As Richard made the call, Tiffany could hear him instructing the pilot to taxi off the runway and wait for official clearance. Yes, I know. You had a point. But we've made it," he said tersely before hanging up. Suddenly overhead, a piercing beep sounded, followed by an announcement. "Attention all passengers, due to ongoing operational issues, several flights have been delayed. We apologize for the inconvenience and will provide updates shortly." Tiffany frowned at the term operational issues. She knew it was code for the drama swirling around them. If the airline didn't handle it correctly, the story would spin out of control, tarnishing the brand and fueling a scandal that might plague them for years. Word spread quickly through the airport that a wealthy businessman's private jet was complicating departures. Social media lit up with speculation, some people praising the father for taking a stand, others condemning the alleged misuse of privilege. When Don finally emerged from another flurry of phone calls, he looked like he'd aged a decade in a single afternoon. "We have prepared a statement, Mr. Wells," he said, voice tight. "The airline is committed to diversity and inclusion, and we regret any distress caused to your daughter by our staff." "Too vague," Richard snapped. "Name the wrongdoing. Name my daughter specifically, and I want Veronica removed from flight duty until further investigation. That's non-negotiable." Don's mouth tightened. "I'll see what I can do." Within half an hour, a press release appeared on the airline's official social media accounts and website. It read, "Airline name, acknowledges an unfortunate incident involving passenger Tiffany Wells on Flight 287. We sincerely apologize to Ms. Wells for the mishandling of her valid first-class ticket. We are reviewing our internal procedures and training to ensure that no customer ever experiences this type of treatment again. We value all our customers and will not tolerate discrimination in any form. It wasn't the strongest wording Tiffany thought, but it was something. Her dad, on the other hand, seemed partly satisfied, yet still simmering. "We'll see if they truly follow through," he said grimly. With the immediate crisis resolved, Richard and Tiffany made their way to the private terminal on the far side of the airport. A white courtesy car whisked them across the tarmac. Tiffany watched as commercial planes took off in the distance now that the runway was cleared. Despite everything, a sense of relief washed over her. She was finally leaving. She could still salvage her trip to New York, albeit several hours behind schedule. Inside the sleek private terminal, the environment was serene. No crowds, no lines, just polished floors and tasteful decor. Her father's jet waited on the tarmac, gleaming in the afternoon sun. The pilot, a tall woman named Captain Morgan, greeted them at the door. "I hope you understand, sir," she said to Richard. "I didn't mean to cause chaos, but I felt we were being sidelined without valid reason." Richard offered a small, appreciative grin. "Well, you certainly made a statement. Let's just be sure we take off peacefully now." Tiffany breathed in the moment. It felt surreal. She'd started the day expecting a simple routine commercial flight and ended up in a swirl of conflict, standing on a private runway with her father, who'd orchestrated an unprecedented stand against discrimination. Once they were airborne, Tiffany settled into a plush leather seat, gazing out the window at the cotton candy clouds. Captain Morgan's voice came over the intercom, announcing they had reached 30,000 feet and would be in New York in under 2 hours. No need for gate changes, no lines, no hassle. Richard sat across from Tiffany, his expression tired but resolute. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said gently. "No one should ever have to feel singled out because of their skin color or age or any other reason." Tiffany nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Thank you for standing up for me, Dad. I just wish it hadn't escalated so far. A part of me wonders if people will say we used wealth and privilege in the wrong way." Richard leaned forward, taking her hand. "We used the resources at our disposal to fight an injustice. There's no shame in that. If I had no money and no plane, I'd still fight tooth and nail for you, just in a different way." Tiffany squeezed his hand, finding solace in his words. She glanced out the window again, the clouds stretching endlessly, a symbol of possibility and freedom, ironically, the very things that had been denied to her just hours before. While Tiffany and Richard soared quietly above the clouds, the story on the ground was anything but calm. Someone from the flight, possibly in first class, had recorded a video of Tiffany being asked to leave her seat and of Richard confronting Veronica. The clip, though shaky, captured enough context to go viral on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Hashtags like #flying, while black, an airline incident trended as users debated the ethics of the confrontation. Some argued that Tiffany was clearly discriminated against, while others claimed they needed more information. A wave of support flooded in for Tiffany, praising her father's unwavering stand. Yet a smaller but vocal subset labeled Richard's actions as entitled and grandstanding. By the time Tiffany's private plane touched down at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, near New York City, her phone buzzed with an onslaught of notifications. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers reached out in solidarity. News outlets were already picking up the story, featuring headlines such as "Teenager allegedly removed from first class over Racefather's private jet, takes a stand. Tiffany read some of the messages, a mixture of gratitude and overwhelm swirling inside her. The world was talking about her ordeal. She just wondered if this publicity would lead to real change or fade away in the never-ending news cycle. At Teterboro, Tiffany and Richard were greeted by a small entourage family friends, a car service, and a smattering of reporters with cameras waiting for a statement. Richard guided Tiffany past them, declining to comment until they'd had time to breathe. "No press, right now," he said, politely but firmly. Once they were in the privacy of the car heading toward Brooklyn, Tiffany's phone rang her Aunt Angela. "Sweetie, are you all right?" Tiffany couldn't help but smile at the warmth in her aunt's voice. "I'm fine. It was a crazy day, but Dad took care of it." Angela sighed. "I've been watching the news. It's everywhere. Just come here and relax. We'll figure out the rest later." Tiffany felt a wave of relief. She yearned for a sense of normalcy. Family dinners, laughter, maybe even a stroll around the neighborhood. Next to her, Richard scrolled through his own phone, reading headlines and coordinating with his PR team. He caught Tiffany's eye and gently placed his hand over hers. "We'll address the media soon together," he assured her. "For now, let's just be with family." Back at the airline's corporate headquarters, chaos reigned. Executives huddled in emergency meetings, trying to salvage the company's reputation. Share prices dipped slightly, and employees from various departments braced themselves for an internal shakeup. An official investigation was launched into Veronica's actions, with some employees claiming they had witnessed similar behavior before. At the same time, the Department of Transportation caught wind of the incident, spurred on by the social media storm and multiple complaints from outraged viewers. The airline faced a potential federal review of its training protocols to ensure compliance with anti-discrimination regulations. Veronica found herself suspended pending the outcome of a formal inquiry. Logan, the flight attendant who had initially tried to show kindness, gave a brief internal statement supporting Tiffany's account. The airline, under mounting pressure, considered reaching out to Richard Wells directly for a higher-level settlement that might soothe public outrage. However, Richard wasn't in the mood for quiet settlements. He wanted real change and accountability, not just monetary payoffs or half-hearted apologies. The storm raged on, swirling around the question, would the airline genuinely evolve, or was it all just crisis management theater? A day later, Tiffany and Richard sat in the sleek Manhattan studio of a popular morning news show. They'd agreed to do one live interview to share their story and highlight the broader issues of racial profiling. Tiffany felt nerves tingle in her stomach, but she also felt a sense of purpose. Seated across from the host, they recounted the incident, being careful to stick to factual details. Tiffany explained how she felt singled out the moment she boarded, how humiliating it was to be asked off the plane, and how it seemed all too coincidental that her skin color might have spurred suspicion of fraud. Richard emphasized that his goal was never to inconvenience other travelers, but to show that families like his refused to be silent in the face of injustice. The host, eyes sympathetic, asked, "What do you hope comes from this?" Tiffany took a breath. "I hope airlines and other service industries take a good look at how they treat people of color or anyone who looks out of place. I don't want to see anyone else go through what I did." Richard nodded in agreement. "We're using our platform to demand better training, better accountability, and ultimately a more respectful experience for every passenger." Even after the interview, the ripples continued. Veronica, who had been the face of the airline's immediate wrongdoing, lost her job after the internal investigation revealed not only Tiffany's incident, but also other complaints of unprofessional conduct. Her superiors, once quick to back her, distanced themselves, leaving her to bear the brunt of the scandal. The supervisor who made Tiffany leave the plane was demoted, and Don, the regional manager who had tried to salvage the situation, found himself under scrutiny for not acting swiftly enough to correct the injustice. While he retained his position for the moment, his career trajectory became uncertain. Meanwhile, the airline's top brass faced an avalanche of negative press. Competitors took advantage of the fiasco, touting their own inclusivity efforts. Lawsuits from other passengers claiming discrimination experiences with the same airline began to surface. It was as if Tiffany's ordeal had opened the floodgates, and now the airline faced accountability for years of turning a blind eye. For those who orchestrated or tolerated Tiffany's humiliation, karma arrived with a resounding impact, reminding them that no one was above consequence in an age of camera phones and viral news. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal for Tiffany, well, a new kind of normal. She continued to receive messages of support, and occasionally some bitter trolling online, but she focused on her education and personal interests. The ordeal had sparked in her a desire to become an advocate for other young people facing discrimination. She started a vlog sharing her experiences and encouraging discussions about racial profiling, the importance of speaking up, and the power of unity. Richard, meanwhile, allocated funds and resources from his company to support civil rights organizations and youth mentorship programs. He recognized that not everyone had a parent with a private jet or the financial resources to fight injustice so prominently. He wanted to level the playing field for those without the means to push back. They both knew that one high-profile incident wouldn't eradicate systemic issues, but it was a step of spotlight and a catalyst for necessary conversations. In a way, the airline's wrong had galvanized an entire movement. At least that's what Tiffany hoped. Let this not be just another viral incident, she thought. Let it bring actual change. Back in Atlanta for a follow-up meeting with the airline's executive board, Tiffany and Richard found themselves with some free time. Tiffany suggested they visit a memorial exhibit at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport that honored civil rights leaders, an often overlooked part of the terminal. She wanted to connect with the legacy of those who fought harder battles long before her. Walking through the exhibit, reading quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and other pioneers, Tiffany felt a surge of pride. They had endured far worse, and their struggles paved the way for moments like hers, where a father and daughter could at least confront an institution and demand justice. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "You know, this just shows us how far we've come, and how far we still need to go," he said quietly. Tiffany nodded, her gaze fixed on an inscription. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Perhaps it was a fitting sign. Their battle with the airline was far from the final fight against injustice, but it was a crucial bend in that arc, a moment where the moral universe tilted just a little more toward the right side of history. After the visit, they made their way to an upper-level conference room for a final debriefing with airline executives. To Tiffany's surprise, Logan, the kind flight attendant, was there as well. He'd become a key witness in the airline's internal review, testifying that Veronica had willfully targeted Tiffany. Logan approached Tiffany when there was a break in the discussions. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner," he said, face earnest. "I was afraid for my job, but I should have said something in the moment." Tiffany offered a small smile. "I appreciate you telling the truth eventually. Every bit helps." Richard acknowledged him with a nod. "Thank you. Your honesty might save others from going through the same ordeal." Meanwhile, across the room, Don spotted them. He approached, looking somewhat relieved. "Mr. Wells, Miss Wells, we appreciate your meeting us again. The airline has committed to a comprehensive training overhaul. We're also establishing a dedicated hotline for any discrimination complaints. Tiffany saw a sincerity in Don's eyes, this time a man who had survived the storm and perhaps learned a lesson in the process. It wasn't perfect, and the future would judge whether the airline truly changed. But for now, it was a start. Weeks later, Tiffany found herself booking another flight, this time for a trip to Los Angeles to explore a summer internship opportunity. Despite lingering anxieties, she refused to let one awful experience taint her love for travel. After all, she had a world to see, and no one could keep her grounded. Richard, seeing her determination, gave his blessing. "You've proven you can handle yourself," he teased. "But remember, if anything goes wrong, I'm just a phone call away." Tiffany laughed, hugging him tight. She thought back to the humiliating moment she was asked to leave her seat and how drastically the situation had escalated. Then she reflected on the outpouring of support and the positive changes that followed. Perhaps the arc of the moral universe had bent a little more on that day. As she walked through the airport terminal, passers-by occasionally gave her curious smiles or nods of recognition. Some had seen her story on the news or on TikTok or read about it in an online article. But Tiffany held her head high, stepping confidently onto the plane. This time, no one questioned whether she belonged in her seat. She did, and she always would. And there you have it, a single incident of blatant injustice exploded into a national conversation that shook an entire airline. Tiffany's story reminds us that sometimes the boldest stands happen when our backs are pressed against the wall. When one determined father refused to let his daughter's dignity be trampled, a whole system was forced to confront its biases. Now, it's our turn to keep bending that arc of justice. If Tiffany's journey has inspired you or opened your eyes to the subtle ways discrimination can appear even at 30,000 feet, let's keep the conversation going. Share this video to spark more discussions and subscribe for stories that shine a light on the resilience and courage found in everyday life. And don't forget to like and comment below with your thoughts, because change doesn't happen in silence. Together, we can demand fairness and equality for all. Thank you for watching.